Hey guys, I wanted to just make a quick video on how to replace the front wheel bearing hubs for a 4x4. I think they're the same for all second gen Rams, but in my specific case this is a 1998. So as you can maybe see on this video, and if not, I'll put another video that I have of a little clearer shot in there. The bearing inside of my wheel hub is shot, which is unfortunate because I replaced it only 2 years ago, but who knows, maybe it's just cheap crap, I'm not entirely sure. But I'm going to walk through just how to take it apart, some tips that I have, and what you should look out for when working on replacing these. So we'll go ahead and get started. One thing to point out that I've already done is I've got the brake caliper off with the brake pads off, the rotor is off, and you'll see these two pieces of metal back here. That's actually supposed to be the dust shield for the brake rotor, but as is all things in the Northeast, it has rusted away completely, so there's nothing left for it. And I'm not entirely sure if you actually need those back there, but I figured they were there originally, so maybe that space is important, but I kept them there. Not entirely sure if you need them, but anyway, we'll go ahead and start taking this apart. So there's a couple nuts that we're going to have to take off in order to get this hub out. There's one main castle nut here in the front, and then in the back there are three 14mm, I guess you'd call them hub bolts. And one thing to take note of is those are, I believe, 12-point socket or 12-point nuts, and I have a 12-point socket here. It's just from Craftsman. The castle nut on the front, the socket I picked up from Tractor Supply, but it is a 1 11/16 socket. Now the one that they had again was a 12-point, but you could just rotate it around until it finally fits in there, and then you're fine. I did measure this with a set of calipers, and I believe it's also the equivalent of a 45mm socket. Not entirely 100% sure on that, but I know for a fact the 1 11/16 socket fits right on there. So I would recommend taking this front one off first and then taking the back ones off, so that's what I'm going to do real quick. So this nut actually gets torqued to something astronomical, like 175 foot-pounds. So you're going to need a piece of metal in here or something to prevent it from turning. Now I just have a weird piece of angle iron here that I happen to have on hand. I guess what you could do is keep the rotor and brakes on if you don't have anything like this, and have someone press the brakes for you to unscrew this. But since I've had this on and off a couple times, I know it's not terribly tight. So just gonna go ahead and loosen it up, and I think I've got it hand loose now. So I'm just gonna take this off. Now there is gonna be some sort of a cotter pin in there in between the castles. I would probably not recommend using that again. I would only try and use new cotter pins if you can, but there's the castle nut, and then back behind here, we can't see it yet, but there's a washer. You always want to make sure it goes castle nut and then washer. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to take these back nuts out. So these three nuts, I believe, get torqued to something crazy like 125 foot-pounds. Maybe it's 120. I'll double check when we go to do the tightening procedure. But when I did this the first time, and again I replaced these about 2 years ago, I put anti-seize on these threads, but these were incredibly difficult for us to get out. So what we actually did was we came from the front and we heated it up with a torch. We came from the back and heated it up with a torch. We got an impact on there, and what it finally wound up taking was a giant breaker bar to get it out. So since I know it's not terribly tight, this isn't going to be a problem, but just crank on it until you get it going. And you will have to rotate this one way to get these two nuts off, and then rotate it the other way to get the other one out. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all loose and get them out, and then I'll show you a tip for how to get the hub out of the centerpiece. So a tip that my friend and I found out is if you leave these bottom bolts threaded in just barely, you got enough distance here where a longer socket, if you put it over the end here, and you turn the steering all the way to one side, it can help. If you press on that, you're pressing on the hub, and if you press on the hub, it's going to push it out a little bit. So what you can do is you'll put that socket in there, and then you'll turn it to the extreme, and then if I go turn on the steering wheel, that should help push this away, and then you can kind of get a pry bar in there. So give me a second. I've gotten a little bit of a gap down here, so now what I'll do is I'll go do it to the other side. I'll do this back and forth a couple times. That's not supposed to come out, but anyway, there's your washer for that. And I've actually got it loose, so I don't need to go do the other side. I've done this a couple times back and forth. I've even got anti-seize in there. But what you would do is you would take, like I said, you can rotate the knuckle a little bit. Oh my god. You rotate that, you keep these threads out just a little bit, and you just work it back and forth a bunch of times, going from one side to the other. You may need a slightly longer socket so that you butt up against here and you're not hitting into the drive shaft here. But after that, you can go ahead and loosen these. Take the bolt out. I've already got the top one out. Take this out. And then there you go. You've got your hub out. And if your brake dust shields are as destroyed as mine, try and keep them in the right order. I don't exactly know what the right order is anymore because I don't have them, but just lay them off to the side how they came off. That way you don't get confused, and you can go ahead and get this out of here, get ready to install the new one. One thing that I would recommend doing is getting some grease on these splines in here. Don't grease anywhere around the building, or Jesus. One thing I'd recommend doing is getting some grease on these splines in here. Don't recommend greasing up the bearing or any of the sealing surfaces. For the mating surface, I'm going to use some anti-seize around it just to prevent it from, actually it's going to be this surface here. I'm going to put some anti-seize on there just in case. I do have to take it back out. As you can see, I've still got some on here. That made it taking it out really easily. I'm just using some full synthetic Valvoline grease. I like to make sure it's high temperature just for some extra protection, especially because all the rotation and from the brakes and everything else, it probably needs the high temp. So anyway, I'm going to grease that up, grease up the spline on the drive shaft, and then reinstall. Okay, so I've got grease on my spline in my hub. I put some on the shaft as well over here. Now, you don't need a lot. You're not packing a wheel bearing or anything. I just have some so that as you're coming in and out, or if there's any play when you're turning or anything, if it's whatever, I don't know, I'm probably making stuff up. But anyway, it's just to help it stay lubricated, not rust out, all that stuff. If this surface inside of here is gunked up and looks like crap, you can pull the entire drive shaft out, clean that out. It's also a great opportunity if you have serviceable ball joints while you have the shaft out to get to them and grease them up. So anyway, like I said before, you want your great looking condition brake shield things on there. I'm going to go ahead and put these on and then slide the whole assembly in. Might have to turn it a little bit to get the holes to line up. Give it a couple taps here and there. And then I'm going to get my bolts. Throw some anti-seize on the threads. Thread them in. Okay, and then we're going to torque those 3 down. Like I said, I think it's 125 foot-pounds, but I'm going to check the manual real quick, and then I'll just confirm that, and then we'll go ahead and install the front castle nut and washer. But from right now, we should be able to see there's no play in that anymore, so let's go check those torque specs. So I was right, the 3 14mm bolts are 125 foot-pounds, and the front one is 175. So for these back ones, it's just straight torque it down. For the front, there's a little bit of a procedure there, so I'm just going to quickly go ahead and torque those back ones down to 125 foot-pounds. So give me just a second. Definitely watch your back when doing this, because it's a bit of an awkward angle, and you really don't want to be hurting your back doing something like this. Okay, there's 125. I've now turned it enough to get to this one. So we'll do this one, and then we'll do the other side. Okay, and one more on the other side. Okay, there you go. Those 3 bolts are torqued. Now we can talk about this front one. Okay, so like I said before about the cotter pin, there's a hole here, and as you're tightening that castle nut, I'll just show you real quick, these holes, or these slots in the castle nut, will eventually show up underneath. Like right here, you can see how you'd be able to get a cotter pin in for that hole. But sometimes it's like just halfway over, and usually there's 2 cotter pin positions so that you can go either forward just a little bit or backward just a little bit. And the manual, what it says is to torque this down to 175 foot-pounds and then go either forward or back to the nearest hole position, whichever is closest. Now, I tend to usually try and go for the next one because it's usually not that much farther, but if it lines right up, I just stick it in. I don't like going back a little bit. I always like going forward, but that's just me. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get this with the washer behind it torqued down to 175 foot-pounds. Look where my hole is, and I'm pretty much lined right up with the hole, so I'm going to get a cotter pin, stick that through, bend it over, we should be good to go. Okay, there you go. And then, like I said, if I try and move this at all, it's nice and tight, doesn't feel sloppy, so that's all you should need to change out the front hub on a 2nd gen Ram 1500 4x4. So, hope you enjoyed. I'm just going to button this back up and take it for a test drive.